Não é? Eu gostaria, então, em primeiro lugar, apresentar a vocês a primeira depoente, que será a Carolina Varsky, cidadã argentina, professora de Direito Constitucional, dirige um programa de memória e luta contra a impunidade do Estado terrorista e é uma investigadora do Centro de Estudos Legais e Sociais de Buenos Aires, que é um centro de considerável prestígio na Argentina. E depois de Carolina, falará a nossa amiga Cat Collins, que é inglesa, mas se comporta como se fosse uma chilena, não é? É professora de ciência política, ela foi investigadora no Instituto Real de Relações Internacionais em Londres e atualmente redige um livro sobre a justiça pós-transicional ou de transição no Chile e em El Salvador. Começamos pelo enfoque na Argentina. Você tem a palavra, Carolina.
Thank you. Sorry for both English and Portuguese speakers, but I choose the English instead of the Portuguese or the Spanish. So it's an honor for me to be here, and thank you very much for the invitation. I'm going to talk about the relevance and impact of the organization of a Truth Commission in Argentina. And for this purpose, I will start by a brief account of the process of truth and justice for serious human rights violations committed during the period of national history known as state terrorism. First, we have to know that Argentina is one of the countries of the region that has passed through a dual process of truth and justice. This process has taken different forms in different historical periods since 1983, return to democracy. These forms will be described and analyzed later. The so-called period of state terrorism in Argentina took place during the country's most recent de facto regime between 1976 and 1983. The period was characterized by the persecution, illegal detention, harassment, disappearance, and murder of thousands of people accused of being political opponents of the regime. This was a clandestine system. Repression was planned and carried out in secret and without judicial oversight. This secrecy made repressive operations more effective. The first stage in the Argentinian process, a search for truth, dates back to the 1983 return to democracy. It began with the creation of the National Commission on the Disappearance of Persons, here in Nacional we said CONADEP, created by presidential decree. The Commission mandate was to research and document disappearance, torture, and execution carried out by state agents during the recently ended dictatorships. Its mandate allowed the Commission to obtain testimonies from victims and victims' relatives, but excluded the prosecution of crimes or the determination of criminal responsibilities. The final report here is the well-known Nunca Más, or Never Again, which summarized the Commission's findings. Now, this process of searching for the truth must not be considered as separate from societal claims for justice for the crimes committed. After the publication of the Trust Commission report, the state accordingly set in motion a trial of the military juntas. The so-called Juicio de las Juntas was a trial to determine the individual criminal responsibility of members of the three military juntas that had ruled the country during the preceding dictatorship. The outcome of the trial was the conviction of some of the key perpetrators. This trial process produced a kind of domino effect, and other cases were started against direct perpetrators of kidnapping and torture. Reactions to these developments caused a political crisis in 1987, as a result of which the government of President Raúl Alfonsín enacted the so-called impunity laws, the full stop and due obedience law. This law halted trials against other individuals identified as responsible for crimes. The Argentine process, therefore, entered in a new stage characterized by impunity. Once the laws were enacted, the human rights movement relaunched its tireless struggle to find the real truth about the final destination of the disappeared, a mission which CONADEP had proved unable to carry out completely. The human rights movement identified this particular cause as the next most urgent task once criminal cases have been rendered impossible or a criminal action. Even so, the prevailing social climate was not favorable even to the search for further truth. Argentina eventually held a series of so-called truth trials, or juicios por la verdad, between 1995 and 2000, and at this moment there are some that are still continue apart from the criminal process. The domestic truth trials were complemented by third country criminal trials, mainly in Europe, which successfully invoked international jurisdiction to indict former Argentinian military personnel. That's the case is well known as Garzón's persecution in Spain. This twin-track process contributed to the later reopening of national criminal trials in 2000. Finally, and after almost 2 decades of restrictions and impunity, the process of criminal justice for these crimes was reopened in Argentina around 2001. This reopening gave way to the current and most active stage in the whole process. In order to evaluate CONADEP's effectiveness in fulfilling its goals and mandate, and also in its contribution to the justice, I would say that CONADEP was formed in December 1983 by President Alfonsín, and Alfonsín called up on a group of 10 well-known national figures to make up the commission. Also, he invited both chambers of Congress, had the right to appoint representatives, but only the lower chamber did so, the deputies. The CONADEP commissioners then organized and carried out investigations all over the country. These investigations produced information collated in what later became an important archive, containing all the evidence CONADEP was able to piece together from the reports of delegations which traveled the country searching victims or their relatives. CONADEP's primary objective, as I mentioned before, was the search for the truth about the fate of the disappeared and about the systematic nature of state repression. In terms of concrete results regarding these aspects of the mandate, as Eduardo mentioned before, its biggest single contribution was clearly the Nunca Más report. The report was a powerful denunciation of the military dictatorship's repressive policies. It set out clearly and eloquently the method by which the state terrorism carried out the torture, the kidnappings, clandestine detention, and assassination. The report showed that these policies could only have been implemented by extensive collaboration from a range of social sectors and institutions. The report was also a testament to the ability of a democracy government to act in concert with civil society to investigate and bring to light truths that the military had tried to keep hidden. The report documented over 9,000 disappearances and hundreds of torture cases. However, it should also be noted that another important achievement of the Commission has been its contribution to the production of evidence for the criminal trials which began in 1985. Taking this into account, it is clear that although CONADEP's mandate prevented it from directly assigning criminal responsibility for the crimes it uncovered, the information produced by the Commission was solid and was taken up by other pro-justice actors embarking in strategies of criminal litigation. Finally, a present-day perspective calls for a new reflections about the achievements and limitation of Commission's findings for the current phase of trials. The reopening in 2001 of criminal justice action for past state terrorism represents an entirely new stage in Argentina's whole truth and justice process. This new stage has drawn on CONADEP files at the very beginning of each individual case. There is a prevailing presumption that any alleged disappearance not documented in CONADEP archives cannot be considered proven. It is regarded, it must be pointed out, that the Commission archive has, however, been added to and updated since 1980s. This was prompted in particular by the passing of laws related to financial economical reparation offered by the state to the victims of serious human rights violations. Another important dimension, and also has to be with what Eduardo said regarding the composition the Truth Commission has to have, is another important has to do with the way testimonies were originally collected. The original mandate and aims of CONADEP determine the way in which its researchers and interviewers question victims or their relatives. Testimony were recorded on a standardized form, which didn't record the level of or sophistication or detail required by criminal procedure. CONADEP registers can be used as the basis of a criminal indictment, but are rarely sufficient in and of themselves to be used as proof against individual perpetrators. Commission researchers were not lawyers, nor were the people working with them, something which is reflected in the evident lack of strategic legal thinking in the way testimonies were taken. This limitation didn't become apparent immediately, as the possibility of criminal action was so limited in the 80s. It has only become evident more recently as justice process has taken hold at national level. As we have seen, Argentina has experienced a combined truth and justice process, one which suffered an interruption that somehow changed the rules of the game. The institution of a Truth Commission and the holding of criminal trials were two initiatives that were designed to be completely linked. However, the impunity laws and the reopening of the justice process demonstrated that the factual truths established 20 years ago were quite insufficient to meet the needs and problems presented by this new stage. The current phase of activity has made visible the need to monitor and measure new aspects. When the institutional obstacles to the criminal punishment were lifted, judicial actors and other branches of the state proved unable or unwilling to design a coherent prosecutorial strategy for the new phase. This phase is clearly qualitative, distinct from the early junta trial, which only sought to determine responsibility at the level of higher ranks who gave orders or oversaw the regime. The new phase represents a considerable advance in establishing the criminal responsibility of direct perpetrators, individuals who actually carry out torture sessions or kidnapping victims. The responsibility of civilians through their participation as regime functionaries all around the country has also been thrown into relief. Almost 4 years after the conclusion of the first trial, the case universe is still expanding and investigations to identify former perpetrators are still in an active phase. Actually, there are around 1,392 perpetrators implicated in cases in Argentina, and the people that were sentenced represent only 4%, compared to the amount of people who are accused. The people who have been convicted represent the 10th part. And not only that, from the 54 convicted in 2006, Only 2 perpetrators' convictions are confirmed by the Supreme Court of Justice. In addition, the expansion of this process has driven a gradual sharing of experiences with other countries of the region who have also suffered grave human rights violations under state terror regimes. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of this process, which has drawn on the contribution of many international actors and institutions, is that it has come to represent an example of the world stage. We can accordingly speak in terms of some sort of mutual exchange or international feedback effect in criminal justice. Ongoing trials in Argentina and in Chile certainly influenced the extradition, the trial of Fujimori, as well as the recent emergence of criminal justice process in Uruguay. There are, in fact, direct overlaps and commonalities between criminal investigation in the region. A good example of this is the investigation of Plan Condor, the international criminal network established by South American security forces under de facto regimes. This repressive plan is currently being actively investigated by several countries in the region, with the same defendants sometimes repeated in cases from different jurisdictions. The Condor investigation currently taking place in Argentina had led to requests for the extradition of the several former members of the Argentina security forces. Meanwhile, 3 Uruguayan military personnel were charged in Chile. And also this next Friday in Argentina, we will hear the verdict against the author of the assassination of the 2 congressmen from Uruguay, Michelini and Gutierrez Ruiz. I would like to conclude this presentation with some brief recommendations. Countries which are currently in a preliminary phase of this process should consider the close interdependence between truth and justice initiatives and design one in close relation to the other. Argentina offers both positive and negative lessons. On the positive side, a holistic approach was taken in the 80s where truth and justice were mutually reinforcing. But then cases were reopened at the end of the 90s. Truth and justice were clearly out of step and had advanced at the different rates. This produced some obstacles to the renewed pursuit of justice, and these considerations can be extremely useful for the rest of the region. Thank you.